All right, so let's get started. Hopefully a few more people will roll in. But thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited to dive into the first resource spotlight of our school year. These last few years have really seen a big focus on climate change in schools across the country. And we're very excited to have worked with FracTracker Alliance, one of our partners, to create educational tools that illustrate the connections between fossil fuels, plastics, and climate change so clearly. So before we begin, I want to introduce myself, my team, and our organization. My name is Annika. I'm the education director at Algalita, and my awesome colleagues are here on the call as well, helping out. So that's Katie, Emily, and Trina. So please wave if you can. So we're Algalita, a nonprofit organization based in Long Beach, California. And we've been working to provide educational experiences that empower educators, students, and our community at large to understand the full scope of plastic pollution's impact on people and the planet, while also providing tangible ways to support solutions. It's our 30-year anniversary. We actually just celebrated last weekend. So we're really excited that our community is still growing as we keep evolving as an organization. So we're officially starting our second year of our Keystone program, Wayfinder Society, which is an online program, online community and collection of resources for educators and students. We had students from over 36 countries using our program in our first year, and we're very excited to see what this year brings. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you're not familiar with Wayfinder Society, we have a range of different resources for educators and students, including free lessons with editable handouts, two of which we'll be diving into today. We'll walk through each lesson so you feel comfortable using it in your class. We also have all materials included toolkits, which can be requested on our website, and those are free for public school educators. We have immersive and educational videos, standards alignment guides. If you're trying to teach to a specific standard, we've outlined which standards our resources address. And we also have a student hub with over 35 action guides that help students take action in their home schools and communities about plastic pollution. We also have educator mini grants that we award every other month, up to $750 of unrestricted funding, so check that out. We also do educator spotlights and news articles, as well as monthly educational events like this one. So hopefully it's not too overwhelming, but hopefully there's something for everybody, whether you're looking for, a quick video to show in class, a full lesson plan, a hands-on toolkit, etc. Funding. Hopefully we can support you somehow, as educators are our greatest allies in environmental movements. So before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to set us up with a little bit of context. So today we're going to be talking about how plastic, fossil fuels, and climate change are interconnected. And for that, we need to look at a part of the plastic cycle that's often less talked about in schools, and that's the production of plastic. So this little diagram shows the cycle of plastics, and we're going to be focusing on the beginning of that today. So pop quiz. What natural resource is 99% of plastic made from? And I'm going to try to do the little poll I set up. Let's see if it works. Launch. Okay, go ahead. Give you guys just 30 seconds. So what natural resource is 99% of plastic made from? Is it sand, wood, fossil fuels, or metal ore? Oh, we got some smart cookies here today. 100%. Woohoo. Yes, so sharing results. The answer is fossil fuels. All right, so still unknown to many, plastics are a fossil fuel product. At large, the plastics industry is part of the fossil fuel industry. And specifically, as they call it, it's the petrochemical industry. And this industry produces a vast array of products that we use in our everyday lives, from fertilizers to pesticides, chemicals like cleaning products, detergents, Vaseline, paints and glues, synthetic rubber for tubing, hoses, pipes, tires, and much more, including plastics for food, packaging, and clothing. So the extraction, transport, refining, and processing of fossil fuels, and particularly fracked natural gas, for the production of plastic has been shown to have large greenhouse gas emissions. Incinerating plastic waste also contributes greenhouse gases, as plastics are essentially hydrocarbons. So recently, a 2024 report by the Lawrence Berkeley Lab showed very similar results to the graph that I'm showing here, which was produced by CL several years ago. And they were estimating that global greenhouse gas emissions from plastic production amounted to 2.24 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2019, representing about 5% of total greenhouse gas emissions that year. So with a current 4% annual growth rate in the industry, so the industry is increasing in size, as we'll be showing and talking more about today. That means that by 2050, the plastic production could double or triple, eventually accounting for between 25 and 31% of our 1.5 degree carbon budget by 2050. So as plastics, like our other main industrial commodities like steel and concrete, are contributing to climate change. So the extraction of the fossil fuels for the production of plastics, that process uses immense amounts of energy and fossil fuels to run and to progress. And then plastics themselves, those products, are made of fossil fuels. And when they are incinerated at the end of their life, which is becoming a more and more popular waste management strategy around the world, that is also contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. So the production of plastic itself is entirely intertwined into fossil fuel extraction. So really, we need to be considering plastics in our climate change conversation and in our solutions to climate change. So FracTracker Alliance, our guest speaker, Ted Auch, is representing FracTracker Alliance today. And this nonprofit has contributed greatly to tracking the expansion of the fossil fuel industry across America with the fracking boom that started in the early 2000s. This expansion has corresponded with an increase in plastic production in the US. And today, the US even exports plastic production feedstock gases to other countries, which we'll see in some of the maps today. So FracTracker shares its data via maps and photos through GIS technology. So what does GIS stand for? It stands for Geographic Information Systems. And essentially, it's a way of managing, analyzing, and communicating data spatially so that we can better understand and communicate the meaning of that data. So geographic corresponds to mapping information, that's the data component, and the systems that geographic information systems technologies, they combine these two things in a way that we can work with the data to better understand it and represent it on maps. So it's a really exciting tool that's being used more and more across industries. It's, a lot of students in university are going into geography and learning how to use GIS. And it's just such an important tool. So that's why we're really excited to introduce it today, and hopefully it can be brought into some of your classrooms. All right, so before we walk through our related lessons, let's dig into the details about the connections between fracking, plastics, and climate change with our guest speaker, Dr. Ted Auch, who has been working with FracTracker Alliance as their Midwest Program Director for 11 years. FracTracker Alliance is a nonprofit that maps, analyzes, and communicates the risks of oil, gas, and petrochemical development to advance just energy alternatives that protect public health, natural resources, and the climate. Dr. Auch is also a professor of global biogeochemistry and soil science at Cleveland State University, and he has had a Ph.D. in ecology and biogeochemistry from the University of Vermont. He has produced countless publications connecting fracking, soil, water, and ecosystem health, environmental justice, climate change, and more through geography and photography. So please welcome Dr. Ted Auch. We'll start with a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A with the attendees. So feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand when the time comes. And just give me a moment before my first question so that I can, I'm going to stop sharing and pin you, Ted, so that everyone can see you. Oops, yeah, that's okay. All right, can everyone see Ted? We're good?
Everyone.
All right. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Auch. So my first question, you've been studying fracking and its impact from so many angles, from using aerial photography to reveal the extent of the fossil fuel infrastructure across the US, to examining the effects of fracking on groundwater, soils, and surrounding communities. Can you tell us from your experience why geography and GIS are such useful tools for addressing systemic environmental issues like fracking, plastics, and climate change?
Yeah, so I think the best way, the way to lead off the answer to that question is to say that the oil and gas industry, we call it like the oil and gas industrial complex. They took a kind of cut and paste from the military industrial complex, in the sense that they put themselves, a little bit of themselves everywhere. And as a result, it's a very diffuse network of infrastructure, from the upstream stuff that you described at the top left of your infographic to the bottom right of that thing. And in so doing, it's not what I would call like a point source actor. It's a non-point diffuse actor in hollers and hills and rural parts of Wisconsin and the west central panhandle of Texas and everywhere in between. So, you know, it's not like a big refinery. Well, refineries are involved, but it's not like big refinery. It's just this diffuse network of infrastructure, and you can't understand the totality of that stuff unless you're looking at it geospatially, unless you have the opportunity to interact with dynamic maps, manipulate maps, add data, you know, turn on and off layers and that kind of thing. And that's kind of the coin of the realm for us, is like we feel like geography, we feel like GIS is the best way to look at this thing. And I can give you a couple of examples of that. And I was thinking about this question. One example that I'm thinking about is, what is the utility of GIS and the work that we've done more recently? It's in kind of trying to anticipate where they're going next. And a great example of that would be carbon capture and storage, and the role that carbon capture and storage is playing in propping up the ethanol industry in the Great Plains and the upper Midwest. So, you know, there's all this stuff you can, and I can share these links with everyone when I get a chance in the chat, but there's all this hullabaloo about CCS up in the Great Plains that would basically take CO2 from ethanol refineries all across the, you know, from Nebraska up into the Dakotas, because it's the easiest CO2 to separate from all the other stuff that comes out of the stacks of these ethanol refineries versus other emitters. And taking that stuff and piping it into places like Illinois and that kind of thing, you know, hopefully never to be seen again. But we all know that, you know, lots of things could go wrong with that. What you're ending up doing is you're propping up a really inefficient industry in the ethanol industry and the automated, highly resource intense ethanol industry. And so that's what's being said. But then if you look at the Biden administration's 45Q program, and not just them, but just, any administration will probably bolt themselves onto this program, is like the tax incentives involved require that you have to be emitting a certain amount of CO2 per year to buy it, to be tapped into this tax program, this 45Q program at the present time. But what we've done with our maps is we've geo-referenced these pipelines as the industry presents them. And by the way, that's not publicly available data. They end up just like doing their dog and pony in different communities. And we take that stuff and try to geo-reference it the best we can. What we've seen is like, okay, so there's these point source emitters, these massive ethanol refineries, but along the trunk lines, that is the connector pipelines to the main transmission pipelines, you see all this other infrastructure that likely will want to feed into it eventually at some point. So we're able to anticipate who's the next, where's the next shoe to fall, and so we've been able to use that from an anticipatory standpoint to try to figure out, because oftentimes we're kind of on the back heel as far as like we're playing defense with the industry, and this GIS has allowed us to play offense a little bit. The other one I'll give you, which I think is really important, is for the fracking industry, that is to say the high volume hydraulic fracturing industry in Appalachia, where we work a lot. We've all heard of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Everyone's heard of the Keystone Pipeline, these massive transmission pipelines that the federal government would permit. But in order to get the gas from the well pad to those pipelines, they have to permit what they call gathering pipelines, these gas gathering pipelines, which you can kind of look at as like the streams and the creeks, and the transmission lines are like the rivers, right? And I use that as an example because we went through a process of arraying a whole bunch of data that FracTracker had compiled in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, to try to figure out, okay, where are these pipelines? Because these different public utility commissions, these 3 states, they collect data to varying degrees and maybe not at all. So you had these big gaps in the pipeline network that the federal government has nothing to do with. So we actually use that data to model and try to map out where these pipelines are. And fortunately, we did that because oftentimes you can figure out where the pipeline went if it went through a forest, because that sticks out. But if it went through like a rural cornfield, that signature goes away within 5 years of the satellite imagery. So that's how kind of we use it, is kind of to map what we know is out there, and then maybe to also oftentimes map what we don't know is out there, and so I think that's one thing. And I think, I would be remiss if I didn't mention a colleague of mine, Karen Edelstein, who's not really, she's partially working for us now, but she was amazing at using maps as like an artistic statement and as like a very rich and deep immersive opportunity for people to interact with maps. I'm not good like that. I use it as like a blunt force instrument, but there's also that other aspect of it, which is the visual and the accessibility of maps. And we found all of that to be very helpful.
You brought up some really cool points about how, the map can be used, or GIS can be used for whatever angle you're trying to get at it from, whether it's, from a political aspect, or you're trying to, keep tabs on what an industry is doing that maybe they're not even required to collect that data themselves. And so who is collecting that data? How are we going to manage, the pollution coming from all of these pipelines if they're not even tracking where they are, the community, the government isn't doing that. So again, nonprofits are so important in doing that kind of work. And I love that you mentioned, how it connects to the artistic side too. Some people are very visual learners, and maps, GIS combines the visual and the data together, the numbers and the visuals together in such an interesting way that they can sort of be explored from different perspectives, which is why I think they're so cool. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think to kind of bolt onto that, I mean, again, this is not why I use it, but I see like amazing work being done by amazing people that work at FracTracker and elsewhere, because I mean, originally FracTracker, that was kind of like our differentiating
Mm.
sales point was, but now a lot of people are mapping and doing really good work at it. But what I'm seeing more and more is like younger people are creating these amazingly immersive like story maps that have like
Mhm.
data and then imagery and then all sorts of amazing, like, I don't know, it's like beyond my capacity to understand, but I think that's that. And then the other thing I wanted to say as far as examples of why GIS is important, like a real practical example is we do a lot of work in Wisconsin looking at the sand mining. You had that image of the sand, and I jogged my memory of like sand is very integral to the fracking process and to the plastics production process, because in order to frack, you have to keep the shale open and you use sand to do that.
Mhm.
And uh, that comes from places where fracking doesn't happen. And I think it's important to mention that, like, one thing we've done is we have been able to model out which mines are going to be around for a long time, and as a result we should be paying more attention to, and which ones are going to be mothballed quickly. And the way that we've done that is by using existing federal data and also data we've collected at the state level around the proximity of these mines to rail. So if they're really far away from rail, they probably aren't going to be able to withstand the volatility of the market. If they're close, they can just dump their stuff on rail and ship it to North Dakota. Or, anyway, the point is like we wouldn't be able to understand that spatial relationship or even that spatial trend if it weren't for GIS.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. My second question kind of builds a little bit off the first one. So when it comes to plastic production and the fossil fuel industry, there seems to be a mysterious shroud around the infrastructure involved for people that aren't, directly involved in the industry or in the work that you're doing. So we may see, a factory behind the fence or a well. We might see it driving down the highway, or even we might live next door to a refinery or a fracking pad or a pipeline, because oftentimes they're very close to our homes. So we can see it, but we usually don't know what's going on there or what the risks are, et cetera. So you've done countless aerial photography flights to help visualize fracking in the fossil fuel industry in the US. So I wanted to show just a couple of pictures. I'll share my screen again for a moment. Could you tell us more about how widespread the fracking industry is in the US and more about how its expansion is connected to plastics? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it needs plastics. I mean, this is like a mutual admiration society, right? I mean, it's like it was originally sold as, like, I think I say this too much, so people that know me know I say this line all the time. Originally, it was like fracking wrapped themselves in the American flag, and all it is patriotism. Because they knew that the best way to get into Appalachia and the best way to get into North Dakota and forget Texas, that's a different story, but the best way to get into these places was to align yourself with the flag and with energy independence and all of these wonderfully sounding, boilerplate messages that they delivered. That was the original thing in order to, like, get into a person's living room, get them to sign on the dotted line. But really quickly they pivoted to export by way of LNG, and that was a little bit later down the road. But they quickly pivoted to things like plastics and fertilizers and feeding into the Archers Daniels Midlands of the world and these massive agricultural companies, and making it cheaper for them to pull corn out of the ground because, don't worry, we can just flush it with fertilizers. And oh boy, if something's going on in Ukraine or there's some issue in some part of the world, we can come to save the day with our LNG export. So it was really never really about energy independence. It was always about maximizing revenue. These are publicly traded companies, so they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. And the maximum revenue that they could get wasn't by, you know, uh, lowering the price of energy for you and me. The maximum price or the maximum revenue was from export, plastics, fertilizers. That was always the plan. So, I think in terms of how are they connected, they're connected because they need each other. And you see, like we have here in Ohio, we had an amazing example of that. We had a representative from the western side of Ohio who actually outlawed communities outlawing single-use plastics in advance of an effort from Ohioans to outlaw single-use plastics or allow communities to do so. And if you look at George Lang, he's the representative. You look at where he got his money, it's no surprise. He gets it from the industries that you would think he gets it from. So there is this like kind of mutual this relationship between plastics, fertilizers, LNG export, and the gas producers themselves, to keep this thing propped up. And yeah, so I mean that's really concerning as far as these images are concerned, and their need to collect them. I think the impetus for that was actually, the original impetus was a gentleman named Bill Hughes in West Virginia. He was in the solid waste district of Westall County, West Virginia. He worked for the waste district. He worked for FracTracker. He's a hero of all of ours. He's since passed away. And he always talked about like collecting photos, just no matter what, just do it, just to do it. And I was always like, yeah, that's great. And I was like, let's take it one step further and fly above this stuff. So, in memory of Bill, that's why we started this. But then fast forward a couple years later, and I remember a guy outside of Chicago where there's a lot of silica sand being mined for fracking, telling me that his name is Rick Coleman. He's also since passed away. He said, whenever a berm goes up, there's a problem on the other side. I mean, I'll never forget him telling me that in his living room. And he was talking about these sand mines that were engulfing his property. And he's like, I can't see anything anymore. I'm flying blind. So that's the motivation for this, is to like get up above the stuff to look at it. And then I would say that the other motivation for why we collect these images, this is me personally now, is like, I can't count the number of times that I've had people contact me is like, what is that thing? Like you just had on your image, gas processing plant. Well, what does that look like? Okay. Does EIA collect data on that? Okay. Well, the answer is that's lagging data. But the answer is also, let's go see what those things look like from the air, because that photo on the left you have, that's outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and you can see they have the sound barriers around that frac pad, so you could never see it if you lived there. So we flew over it. So that's the goal, is to provide people with the imagery that they need to illustrate or to understand what this like actually looks like, and then just to kind of, oftentimes we're looking at sites multiple times over time, which is the case with the shell cracker plant outside of Pittsburgh. We've flown that once a year for the last 6 years. So that's the motivation.
Yeah, I just switched out that picture with this other one because I couldn't re-find it, and I needed to put the citation on there, but I can show that maybe in a moment. But yeah, I mean, so for anybody who's interested, you can go to the FracTracker website, and there are, I don't know, thousands of photos that you and others have taken of all of this infrastructure that's spread across the country, that shows what this, massive industry looks like, and, unveils it a little bit in terms of, how it's impacting communities that, it's just in amongst all these communities, whether it's a pipeline that's being built, across your farm, or you have this refinery that is next to your community. So that goes straight to my next question. I'm gonna stop sharing here.
The answer to the question is liquid natural gas. That's what LNG stands for.
Oh,
It's
LNG stands for liquid.
It's a really high value added, it's a high profit margin, product from fracked oil and gas.
And this is where a lot of the compounds or the molecules that are in liquid natural gas are used to make plastics. And so, when fracking occurs, or any fossil fuel extraction occurs, there are, I don't know, tens, hundreds of different molecules that make up all of that natural gas and petroleum. And some of them are used in the production of plastics. And so those are ethane and propane primarily, and a few others as well. And those chemicals are then chemically reacted and heated in this process called cracking, that changes the molecules. It's like a big chemical, like a big flask that you would have in your science class, right? But on a factory scale, that's turning one chemical into another, and all the way through a process until it's a plastic. And so that this whole process, that's why there's all this infrastructure across the US where, it's being the fossil fuels are being extracted through fracking in the Appalachian region, and then that gas is being piped all the way across to Texas, where it's being put into another factory that heats it up and turns it into something else, that gets then turned into plastics. And there are hundreds of types of plastics. It's a very complex process, and all these other chemicals that I mentioned at the beginning are also produced through these processes. And so it's a massive industry that, if you just look around yourself, in your house, wherever you're sitting at school, you'll see the products of this process all around you, whether it's the paint on the wall or the desk that you're sitting at, the fabric on your chair, the rubber on your shoes, your eyeglasses. It's literally in everything. It's and so it's quite an amazing process. But with plastics particularly, you know, it's been shown to have gotten out of hand. And in fact, the Story of Plastic documentary shows that this industry is driven more by supply than by demand. And so it's the plastics being literally shoved down our throats and into the stores. And so how can we sort of balance this out a little more is what we try to get people to think about. Okay, so my last question is, looking at the maps that we'll be showing in the lessons and that we showed in one of the slides, you can pull that up again in a moment, and the countless photos on the FracTracker website that anyone can go access, all the maps anyone can go access as well. It's clear that this process of fracking leaves tracks and pollution hotspots across our land, but the effects of groundwater contamination, soil contamination, air pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions are less visible in those photos and maps, right? We see the infrastructure, but we don't necessarily see the water and soil pollution from the chemicals that are being pulled out of the ground. So could you share a little bit more from your experience about how fracking and plastic production impacts communities living nearby, and talk a little bit about the environmental justice work that you all are doing?
Yes, I'll take the second part of that question first. So the way, there's a bunch of ways that we try to like operate in the environmental justice space. One that I've been lucky enough to do is to serve on several EPA science advisory boards around their environmental justice, human health risk assessments, and their environmental justice screen tool, EJ Screen. I mean, there's a lot of Californians here, so you all have your own EJ Screen. But if you live in a state like Ohio, where there's no political will now or maybe ever for that kind of thing, you are reliant on the federal government to produce this tool that is interactive, dynamic, and kind of, in real time. So I say that because one of the things that we've been doing to work in the environmental justice space is to sit at that table, hopefully, and try to ground truth the US EPA's analysts and their mapping folks, their GIS folks, in the gaps in the data, especially the rural data. I think that they really do quite a good job in their human health risk assessments and their EJ Screen tool, and understanding and capturing environmental justice in urban centers with point source polluters. I think they don't do they do the opposite of that in rural areas with more diffuse networks of operators and stuff, which gets back to my first answer to my first question, which is what we're talking about. And they don't do that because of the EPA's requirement that any environmental justice analysis or screen tool incorporate what they'll call nationally consistent data. That phrase is a huge hurdle when it comes to understanding the impacts of the oil and gas comings and goings. So the goal here, the goal in that space is to say, if you want to look at environmental justice, I'm not here to like lecture you on what you do in urban areas. I think you do a great job. But if we want to do apples and apples, and if the environmental justice screen tool and the Justice 40 initiative are going to be fuel for the funding of projects, air quality monitoring, citizen science monitoring, and we are going to be scoring those grants based on your stuff has to be more complete across that rural to urban continuum. So that's one thing that we've been talking about, is like what kinds of data we think adhere to that requirement, what kinds of data we think could, if worked with, better. And then where the it's like Donald Rumsfeld said, the knowns and the unknown unknowns, where they exist in the data, where to find the data, because I think we're good at like knowing where all the bodies are buried from a data standpoint. So EJ, that's one thing we do. The other thing we do and are doing more and more is just kind of trying to delve into qualitative data. And I know US EPA is very concerned about their inability to capture qualitative data and their need for like charts and graphs and spreadsheets. So I think one thing that we're trying to do is get out of the way of the story and just offer up a platform to front and center the stories of people that live in communities that don't necessarily jump off the page in terms of like the New York Times or the LA Times, but indeed they're facing all of this stuff in rural, forgotten places. So, trying to develop these projects in these formats for them to do that. So that's another way that we're looking to do this. And then the first part of the question was,
Hold on, I lost it
yeah,
too. If you
okay.
could talk about just
Oh
how
yeah.
the effects that communities are dealing with, what are they?
Yeah, I mean they're myriad. They're everything from I mean the stories go on and on. I mean if what we're saying is plastics is something that's up to and including everything that I've already talked about, they include living in a community that has been inundated with man camps and flaring. I mean that photo you showed on the prior slide, the top right one, that's in Scio, Ohio, which is a gas processing plant that's directly implicated in the plastics industry. Imagine living in a community where those stacks are flaring 24/7. I mean it's daytime all day. So that's an example. Living in the path of a transmission pipeline that's taking gas from the gas fields to the plastic processing facilities, knowing that these pipelines could leak, or just having them in your backyard. It's the elephant in the room. Living in that kind of environment, no one should have to do that. Those kinds of stories. And there's another example that I could use, which is that like there's a company in Ohio. There's two companies that were in Ohio that were promising significant riches to school districts and counties if they are allowed to establish right of ways through those counties. And they promised that to the state and to these districts, and they ended up writing down what they were promising by 75%. So you have school districts that were left planning for 5 and 10 year plans based on what Nexus told them they were going to give them, and now they're left standing when the music stops. So telling those stories, trying to get out of the way of those stories, and I would say probably the number one thing is just knowing what stories need to be told by really good journalists and trying to bend their ear on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure, people in our movement, working on plastic pollution, prevention, there are so many stories that are starting to be shared around environmental justice and, what communities across the US are facing in terms of, uh, fossil fuel refining, transport, plastic production. And oftentimes, of course, these are communities of color and low income families, whether it's urban or rural. And well, thank you, Ted, so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. We've got maybe time for one question. Was there anything that came up? I didn't see anything in the chat, but if anybody has one question that we could jump into, otherwise we'll go straight to talking about the lessons. Anybody can, my team help see if there's any, no? Okay. Well, feel free to stick around, Ted. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited and just, excited for the work that you all are continuing to do and grateful for you as a partner.
Yeah, and if the people on this are interested in the work we do or connecting with us, I'm happy to help them if we can. So
Fantastic. Maybe we'll include your website, and yeah, just ways for them to connect with you all in our follow-up email.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Ted. So let's move over to talking about some of the lessons that we have to share with you all specifically about what we just talked about, and we'll get a little bit more into those. So let me try to figure out where I am on my computer. This happens to me every time. Oh yeah, share screen. Okay. If you know me, you know I can't multitask, so here we go. Okay, so these are two different lessons that we wanted to talk about today. Hopefully we'll get through both of them. I'll spend a little bit more time on the first one because once you're familiar with the first one, the second one sort of just builds off of it a bit more, provides an extra layer of data for students to explore, and specifically about which it has a little bit more information about how, you know, the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from all of this infrastructure that's being built currently and planned out. But these are both available for free on our website at Wayfinder Society. We'll send those links to you in the follow-up email so you can access them easily. And my colleague's also going to put the links in the chat. So if you want to follow along as we're going through the lesson, I'm gonna open up our website in a moment. But if you wanted to follow along with the links on your own, you can do that too. Also, just a reminder that we're recording this, so don't feel like you need to take notes unless that's helpful for you. So just a little bit of an overview of the lessons and sort of the purpose of them before we dig in. So both of these lessons were designed in partnership with FracTracker Alliance. It's their data, and they put them together, and we sort of built the lessons around those. So around the maps. They're both interactive maps. Dr. Ted Auch talked a little bit about this story mapping. So the second lesson here, talking about plastic production, its connection to climate change, is a story map. And so sort of your students read the story, and as they're reading the story, they're looking in at the map about the details that are being talked about in the story. So it's really a cool interactive piece. And they both show how plastics are made from fossil fuels. So if you're, you know, talking about synthetic materials in your middle school classroom, these are a little bit advanced for middle school, but they could be used as you know, either a piece of evidence that you're going to use and talk about in your class. You can edit our resources as you would like. So all of our handouts are completely editable. So if you wanted to edit them and make them a bit more applicable for your middle school class and talking about how synthetic materials come from natural resources, this is like the perfect tool for that. And they also connect to the topic of environmental justice, social justice issues that we're dealing with. And so that maybe that's more the angle that you're coming at as an educator. Both of these resources talk a lot about the environmental injustices that are happening through fossil fuel extraction and plastic production. And then lastly, with I've listed out a few of the other standards that are connected with these resources, including high school environmental science, construct an explanation based on evidence for how the availability of natural resources, occurrence of natural hazards, and changes in climate have influenced human activity. So the second lesson specifically talks about all three of those things and how they're influencing human activity. So I just wanted to point that out before we dive in case I failed to mention it later. So with the first lesson, I'm going to head over to the website, and I'm actually going to list the hey, there's one. Practice this one. Okay. So, thanks, team. No, okay. All right, can everyone see that all right? Okay, so this lesson has students develop their geography skills by exploring an interactive map about plastics production and how it impacts communities. I already talked a little bit about the standards it's connected with. And here are the handouts that we have associated with the lesson. So we've got purpose and context Google Doc, which is this text, just in a format that's easy to share, as well as a student worksheet right here that is also editable. So you can either, edit this on your Google Drive and then print it out. You can download it to your computer. And that is simply through this file here, download or make a copy, and then you can edit your own personal copy. So as Dr. Auch talked about, plastics and fracking are intricately connected. So hydraulic fracturing is, if you're not unfamiliar, this is a form of fossil fuel extraction where a well is bored into a certain layer of rock called shale, which has tiny little pores that gas and oil are trapped in. And so fracking essentially cracks open the rock underground and releases those fossil fuels. Here's another video that you can share or view yourself to learn a little bit more about fracking. And this fracked gas is then transported and transformed into the materials that we call plastics. So this lesson really is all about having your students explore this map on their own, or you could do that by sort of modeling it in your class and having it up on the front screen and exploring it together. But we do suggest that to introduce this lesson, you could use the Story of Plastic animated short. So between the start of the video and 1 minute and 11 seconds, this is a really good sort of quick introduction into what we're going to be talking about. And it sort of sets the scene for learning more about fossil fuel extraction and the whole production process. So then you could have students explore the map, and we'll get to that in a moment. And then after they're exploring the map and clicking on all the icons, as we'll do in a moment together, we do have some extension opportunities here as well. So another partner of ours, Peak Plastic Foundation, produced this brilliant short documentary called Breathe This Air with communities in the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana who are dealing with the immense amounts of air pollution that are coming from the refineries, the hundreds of refineries in their area, as we'll see in the second map. And so this is a really great, follow-up if you're going to go more into the environmental justice issues associated with this. And we also have some other lessons like the follow-up lesson, the second lesson that we'll show, and which builds directly off of this first one. And we also have a problem with plastics, think, pair, share lesson that has students sort of contemplating the pros and cons of plastics. And so if you do end up using this lesson, which we hope you can trial this year, we do have a quick little educator survey just lets us know, this is on each lesson page, just to let us know that you use the lesson so we can contact you and sort of follow up with how it went. Or if maybe you just select, yeah, I'm interested in doing it, but maybe next year, so we could follow up with like why, how can we improve it so it's going to be better for you. So without further ado, let's check out the map. So these maps are quite intricate and they're best viewed on a desktop. Laptops work, but there's a lot going on, so it's a little tricky. Bigger the screen, the better, but I assume in classrooms, laptops are all you have, unless you have it on the big screen projected. So this map is showing linking fracking to plastic production. And as Dr. Auch sort of explained, GIS incorporates data into a map. So when you open up this map, you'll see on the left-hand side this legend here, which shows all the different icons in this map. And this map was designed specifically for us, so it shows them in an order that will help your students walk through that whole process. So essentially you could see, okay, number one, fracked gas wells. That's these little blue dots. Oh, I see them here. So let me click on one. And then all of this information comes up that students can explore. So fracked wells take oil and gas out of the earth. Watch this video to see how it works. There are over 12,000 fracked wells in Pennsylvania, and many are close to homes and schools. And so there's also images usually, and sometimes there's even more information in a second slide that they can explore here. So I'm not sure why it's not showing up right now. And then they can go to the next one. So fracking waste truck route. So, okay, so there's waste that has to be disposed of. Where is it going? So then they could go sort of explore where that waste is being shipped to. Oh my gosh, it's going all the way to Ohio. And so they can also zoom into the area, and you can really get up close and see, oh, that's what the fracking pad looks like. So it's quite interactive. You can kind of explore it. It's a, you know, choose your own adventure kind of thing. And then when, you know, to find the next piece of this, they're gonna have to zoom out all the way. So then they see, oh, where am I even in the US? So you could even connect it to more of a geography lesson. You can learn about geology, all sorts of different connections. And so then this is the Appalachia, Texas pipeline, express pipeline, which takes that fracked gas and carries it all the way down to Texas, where it's being cracked at this ethane cracker here. And so they're following this whole pathway, and each time they can learn more about that phase of the process. So you can use this on a more superficial level, or you could have them dig into all of these different links and really learn a lot about this issue. So hopefully it's flexible enough that you can sort of use it as is going to work best for what you're talking about in the rest of your human impacts unit or climate change unit. All right, so we're almost out of time. I'm just going to switch over to our second lesson, and I'll actually just do that here. So on each lesson page, you can find related lessons at the bottom, and here are the videos that I was talking about that are linked above if you want to access them that way. So we'll look at the how is plastic connected to climate change lesson. And same structure on the page. You can see the purpose and context, the instructions for the educator to sort of see how we would envision doing this in class, and with extensions as well that connect to specific subjects and standards that you're trying to teach. You'll also always see tips and suggestions down here. So with this map, your students would use a little bit more of the tools that are capable in GIS, including this measurement tool and filter tool. So let's open up the student worksheet as well. And so here the student worksheet is asking them to find information in the map that they're going to have to figure out by using some of those tools and reading more of the information available when clicking on those different icons. So in this map, this is, like I mentioned, the story map. So as you scroll down the page, it will walk you through the story here, which is that across the US, there's a lot of new infrastructure that's being built for fossil fuel extraction and plastic production. And so when you come down here, all these little bubbles pop up, and it tells you what these bubbles are. So these are each different locations where a new facility or a piece of infrastructure is being installed. And if you can click on all of them, and there's more details connected with every single one. including how much greenhouse gas emissions they're predicted to have. So the size of the bubble actually corresponds to the amount of emissions, and the color corresponds to what type of resource it is. So then once they go all the way down to the end of the story, it will have them sort of explore more through these buttons here. And then at the bottom, the full map comes up where you can interact with it further. So you just click anywhere. Unfortunately, this one layer is not showing at the moment. I'm trying to work with FracTracker to fix that, but it doesn't affect anything at the moment in terms of how the map works. So you can just click OK. And here we can use the measurement and filter tools. So one of the questions is going to ask, which of these new facilities is going to have the highest emissions? So if you need to figure out which one of these three it is, so your students can actually just go into this filter tool. They can, try to find it, or they can use this filter tool to identify it through the company name or by looking at what kind of facility it is. And then another one of the questions is asking about how close this new shell ethane cracker that Dr. Auch talked about, which is being built as a new petrochemical hub in the Appalachian region, how close it is to Central Valley High School in Monica, Pennsylvania. And so with that one, they're going to use the measurement tool to zoom into this shell ethane cracker here and use the measurement tool to see how close it is. So you just click, and I'm sure a lot of students are, experts at figuring out digital tools, but you can measure areas, you can measure, you can look at different latitudes, where is something, what are the coordinates of it. You can also get an area. Let's see. So how much is this area filling? So really fun tool to play around with. And hopefully this is a tool that both of these lessons are tools that will help illuminate some, like the fossil fuel industry and the impacts of climate change in a way that's really tangible to students, which is why we're so excited about having this partnership with FracTracker. So with that, are there any other questions? I did have just 2 final slides. To talk a little bit about the student hub portion of our Wayfinder Society program, where we have 35 action guides that students can take to take action on this issue that they're learning about through these maps. So this is a good way to do sort of a follow-up home assignment. It could be an extensive class project, or they could do it extracurricularly through a club, or environmental club on campus, after school club. So there's a video here, and Emma, if you could put those links in the chat. I already did, awesome. And so there's a video that you can learn more about the student hub, because it's, there's a lot there. We also have lots of different ideas for how to use it in school, and we'll also share the link to go directly to these guides. So each guide has, walks the students through what they need to do, and they can even earn credit for completing different actions by creating an account. And you can have students create either a class account where you can monitor all of your class, each student's projects that they complete, or you can have them do an individual account. If you maybe just have one student that's really passionate about learning more or doing more, you can have them create an individual account. And there's also a team account option, which can be used for like a club situation. So, and then lastly, we have educator mini grants, like I mentioned at the beginning. So here's some links and more information about those. Yeah, we want to give you money, so. All right, are there any questions? That was a lot of information. Whether it was about, more of the logistics of how the lessons work, or just more about fracking. Anything?
No questions in the chat, but really sweet things.
Oh, yay.
Thank you.
All right, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And if any other questions do pop up, feel free to email us. We always want to help you all as much as possible with our resources. And yeah, thank you so much again for being here. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone, and please stay in touch. We appreciate you all.